everyone. How do present characteristics influence later development? As already stated, at mid-stage development of the bioecological model, the concept is still evolving. It's not yet done. Most of the research treats cognitive and socio-emotional characteristics as dependent variable or measure of developmental outcomes. However, there are some characteristics are examined as precursors and producers of later developments that have the capacity to influence an emergence and operational of proximal process. To identify, they derive to three kinds of process relevant person characteristics that derive from the theoretical model, which are forces, resources, and demands. Characteristics of the person most likely to influence future development would be active behavioral dispositions. There are two propensities which are developmentally disruptive and developmentally generative. In developmentally disruptive, it's more on mind. It has two poles. Actually, according to the paper, it has two poles. So a person who exhibits either of the two poles will find it difficult to engage in proximal process, which requires progressively more complex patterns of reciprocal interaction over extended period of time. The first pole is the characteristics such as impulsiveness, explosiveness, destructibility, inability to defer gratification, ready to resort aggressions and violence, and the second is more on attitudes and inattentiveness, unresponsive, lack of interest, insecurity, shyness, avoiding or withdrawing from activities. It says that people who exhibit these characteristics will have difficulty in engaging proximal processes. So why is that? Let's take intermittent explosive disorder as an example. It is more mind bound. So this disorder involves sudden bouts of impulsive, aggressive, violent, and angry behavior, whether it is physical or verbal outbursts. Engaging in proximal processes is a challenge for them because this requires participation in activities and roles that they might have no patience, and they might show some aggressive tendency or such in a settings. Another example is people with ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, where they can focus where they can focus on things. Next is the next the next disposition development generative. This characteristic beyond selective responsiveness. Their characteristics involve differentiated response to attraction, exploration of aspects of the physical and social environment, tendency to engage and persist in more complex activities such as elaboration, restructure, creating new features in our environment, sometimes called as structuring proclivities. So their characteristics is like based or in based on their interests, which can shape and influence their later development. Second is the resource characteristics of as shapers of development. It involves no selective disposition to action, but constituted by psychological liabilities and assets that influence the capacity of the organisms to engage effectively in proximal processes. Conditions such as birth defects, low birth weight, physical handicaps, severe and persistent illness, or damage to brain function. Mag-listen sila na mag-engage sa proximal processes because of these conditions. Among families living in stressful environment, infants who are physically healthy from birth are more engaged in reciprocal interaction than those who are biologically impaired. So, their characteristics is most likely based on their conditions, and it can shape and influence their later development. The third and the last one is non-characteristic that press developmental nuances, with their capacity to invite or discard actions from the social environment that can affect processes of a physiological growth, such as versus a baby, attractive versus unattractive, unattractive physical appearance, hyperactivity versus passivity. So it is more like a social environment. So focus, demand, and resource, where focus is more on mind, resources um, is more on the physical, while the demand is more on a social environment. Developmental effect of such features in the studies of the Great Depressions. Economic hardship influences the social well-being of girls through its tendency to increase the rejecting behavior of others. The rejection varied inversely with the physical attractiveness of the daughter. Physical attractiveness are not likely rejected by their fathers, no matter how severe the economic pressure is. So, mas bata ka, so most likely dili ka mamag sa imong father. It was noted earlier, the lowest socioeconomic level, it was the children with weight benefited the most from maternal response. But did it mean that they were also the one who got the most attention? It turns out that it is actually the opposite. Only 14% of these lower-class mothers were judged to be responsive to changes in their infant state or behavior, whereas the percentage of mothers of low birth weight babies was more twice as high, average, averaging 37%. In short, lower-class mothers were responding mainly to those infants who most needed the attention. Mothers are more responsive to the healthiest infants than to those with lowest birth weight. But as shown in Figure 41, 41, the research showed characteristics slightly based on their social environment, where it can influence later development. The role of focus of attention in proximal process. So, diba, na bioecological model, there are two tentative responses on the existing model. First is when a proximal process involves interaction with another person, the model is substantially enhanced by including in the research design a measure of the other person's focus of attention on the particular aspects of the behavior of the subject to be most closely related to the developmental outcome. For Jolene's study, the measure of proximal process is the mother's responsiveness, but we do not know unsa na particular behavior sa baby ang ginaresponda niya. Suggested nila na ang aspect na most relevant in reducing future problem behaviors might be expression of distress. So sa ila, to reduce the tendency na there is tendency about sa behavioral problems in the future is attention na ginahatag sa mother siya anak. Second is when a proximal process involves interaction with another person, the power of the bioecological model is substantially enhanced by including in the research design a measure of the developing person's focus of attention on the particular aspects of the behavior of the other person to be most closely related to the developmental outcome. This is kabaligtaran sa nauna, which is ang sa una kay ang focus of attention sa mother, while here is the focus of attention is sa bata. Next is proximal processes in solo activities with objects and symbols. Gainan ng proximal processes is more on interpersonal interaction, while here is more on objects and symbols. There's a lot of activities that can be carried without the presence of the other person. One is ang own disposition sa person. So, solo activities significantly change the processes involved. Their outcome and the features of the environment becomes more relevant. Ang mga ginabuhat niya alone or sariling interest niya munang makapa-shape siyang development characteristics. To understand the developmental importance of this contrast requires a fuller exposition of the features of the environment that influence proximal processes and their effects. So, there are three person characteristics that affect feature development. First is age, gender, and ethnicity. Age in a way na if early siya na-expose to things or na late siya na-expose to things in the environment, like for example, since infant to toddlers na-expose siya sa environment nagubot, it might affect the child features development. When in gender is more like on gender roles. And in the ethnicity, the child's ethnicity or the cultural background can affect future development or more like cultural differences. Magnified activities, relationships, and roles beyond the microsystem. A microsystem is a pattern of activities, social roles, and interpersonal relations experienced by the developing persons in a given face-to-face setting with particular physical, social, and symbolic features that invite or engagement in sustained, progressively more complex interaction with the immediate environment. Effects of the physical environment on the psychological development. So, patterns of relationship between certain features in the physical environment of the infant during the first 2 years and their cognitive development. In the paper, there are two general aspects of the physical environment that can affect the course of cognitive development of a child. One is for better and one is for worse. Areas that invite manipulation and exploration. So, the mother-infant dyad as a context of development. A substantial body of research indicates that such processes also foster the development of a strong emotional attachment between a mother and a child, which increases the quality of future interaction between the two parties. Through interaction between the infant and the primary caregiver, the infant develops expectation of the caregiver's behavior and complementary beliefs about him or herself. An infant who experiences a history of contingent responsiveness from primary caregiver will develop a model that the caregiver is available and expect such behavior that child will develop a complementary sense of self that he or she is worthy of responsive care, while an infant who has experienced unresponsive care from his or her caregiver will develop a very different model of relationship, expecting the caregiver to be unavailable. Such an infant is expected to develop a sense of self as unworthy of responsive care. Here we can say that the mother-infant interaction is important to a developing person's mind. So beyond the microsystem, a basic premise of ecological system theory that developed as a function of forces emanating from multiple settings from the relations among the settings more on the environment. They analyzed adolescent school performance and they found that, in contrast to youth from European family backgrounds, Hispanic, African, or Asian American youth did not benefit from authoritative parenting. It is more on peer crowds or peer pressure. Their subsequent analysis revealed that European American youngsters from authoritative homes are more likely to belong to a peer crowd that encourages academic achievement. However, to youngsters from minority backgrounds among Black and Asian students, there was no relation between parenting practices and peer crowd membership.